The people of Rakunai and pilgrims on Lower Papua New Guinea are meeting in Rakunai today at the Basilica of Blessed Peter Torot to commemorate his seventh solemnity after the beatification in 1995. Hello, welcome to Signs of the Times. Today we dedicate this edition to remember this indigenous saint and will bring you a documentary about his life and martyrdom. This documentary was prepared before Peter Torot was beatified by Pope John Paul II in January 1995.
This was Rakunai village on the third day of the Rabaul volcanic eruptions in 1994. It doesn't look it, but Rakunai means a grassland in the local Kwanwa language. It was there that the history of the first Papua New Guinean saint began 83 years ago, in 1912, when Peter Torot was born as the third child to Angela Topuya and Maria Yetumul. In his documented testimonies, parish priest of Rakunai and close friend of the family, Father Karl Laufer, recalls thus.
In 1898, there was a spectacular baptism ceremony in Malagunan. The first adults from Rakunai were received into the church at this time and received their spiritual rebirth through the sacrament. One of the chiefs to be baptized was Topuya, the father of Torot.
When the story and testimonies about Peter Torot were documented, only the eldest sister and brother, Teresia Yawarpilak and Joseph Tatamai, were alive. They have all since died.
Our father was Angelo Topuya and our mother was Maria Yetumul. Papa was a clan leader. He was very caring and looked after us. He gave us a lot of good advice and taught us many things we needed to know.
In school, Torot stood out as a bright lad with good conduct. Outside school, he was the boys' leader in work and games. So it was that he was admitted early to receive his first Holy Communion. Impressed with Torot, Father Karl Laufer asked Angela Topuya if his son could become a priest. To that, Topuya replied thus.
No, Father. I don't believe that one of our generation is ready to be a priest. It is too early for that. Perhaps one of my grandchildren or great-grandchildren will be that lucky. But if you want Torot to be a catechist, please send him to the catechist school at Taliligap.
And so Torot was enrolled at the Taliligap Catechist School in 1930. Records of his achievements show yet again that he was of outstanding character. All these were summed up by none other than one of his own classmates, Simon Topaloa.
Me play stop one time long school. That's all me sabe long passing belong Torot. And me one play good play man true. Me sabe long talk cross na one of kind something all the same. And me sabe mari long all nara play man.
Topalawa passed out from Taliligap as a catechist and was posted to Kilenge in West New Britain.
Time big play war he come up. Me walk catechist long Kilenge. Now all see upon two he stopping me finish. Only stopping me finish me no can make him law too. No good babali cut him neck blow me. Now me talk man sorry. Me no pray him knife blow you. Me sabe suppose you kill me now. Now that's all me go to heaven.
The St. Paul's Catechist Training College at Taliligap was a big center. It was also known as a double school because it had a primary school where the trainee catechists did their practical. Peter Torot did not remain long at the catechist school because his parish priest at Rakunai needed him. He called him back before the end of his third year. He obeyed and returned home at the beginning of 1933 and was installed as the youngest catechist. His main occupation was to teach at the mission school where he was once a pupil.
Sila kelas mi stop, sila stop, emi Ia sa mi ken ko lima sen sen siksa. Asa mi pala stop no sila rumia. Mina to lemeusia. Na stop gamri lemi opinis na to ko vai stop. Leking blongin no good. Lewan line lo de la clase.
John Tokeleto is a nephew of Peter Torot, the firstborn of Torot's sister, Teresa Yavarpilak.
Long this pula time boy no kami. Sila kan school no school long English. School da sa lang buk tambuna. Kasik mo sa go to sa ti Mickey.
Torot became very popular amongst his own people right from the time he began his commission as a catechist. In his spare time, he would visit the people and especially the sick. Eyewitness accounts state that Torot was often seen praying alone on the farm and at the church, attended every divine service, and received Holy Communion daily.
I came to know Peter Torot soon after he was installed as a catechist at Rakunai. Because my mother, Iena Lili, was from that place, I went to live there and attended classes in Torot's mission school. And later, when the bride price was paid, I became engaged to him.
Paula Yavarpit was born on the 27th of June 1920 at Ramalmal. When she was 14 years of age, she left her parents and went to live in a mother's village at Rakunai. There she was enrolled in the primary school and became one of Peter Torot's pupils. One morning it was announced that the bride price, 50 coils of mussel shells, had been paid for Paula Yavarpit to be promised in marriage to Peter Torot. On the 11th of November 1936, Torot married Paula Yavarpit in a wedding ceremony witnessed by the community at the Rakunai parish.
Mama blami van pla good pla Mary. Insa koros itru olsem. Sobos ma mi biket longen no usati biket longen en baim tok tok lig.
The Japanese landed on the Gazelle Peninsula on January the 23rd, 1942. 2 days later, they arrived at the Catholic mission headquarters at Vunapope. The work of the missionaries continued regardless, but by October of the same year, all the missionaries were ordered into strict internment. When heavy shelling by the Allied forces destroyed the station, the Japanese then moved the missionaries to Ramallah. There they were to remain for more than a year. Their status had changed from being missionaries to prisoners.
We have 6 big tunnels here for the fathers, brothers, sisters, and for the seminarians. Besides that, we have quite a few tunnels here for the mixed race people who were living here at that time. There were nearly between 300 and 400 people were living here in this area.
Now in the late 70s, Sister Monica is still in the order of the FMI sisters at Vunapope. She was a young sister and lived at Takabur when the war broke out. She still remembers the priests and sisters at the Ramallah concentration camp.
Ramallah, big palaveria, nami palay, bakambak pantapulongin. Long bringing kai maolong kita something belong all pateria olino sa gua long kisimban pala something ni pala all pemai sisteria ni pala taran bringing mal kai belong all ya now something only like him.
One of the priests held prisoner at Ramallah was Father Karl Laufer, the parish priest from Rakunai. As far away as it was from Rakunai, it was no bother for Peter Torot. It is documented that Torot organized food from his people and brought them to Ramallah. The testimony of Father Laufer about those meetings with Peter Torot were recorded.
The news he imparted about conditions outside was anything but joyful. He himself needed consolation and guidance. In the early morning hours, he assisted at my Holy Mass, communicated, and then took the Blessed Sacrament with him to the sick and dying. These forbidden visits were often repeated, and he never came empty-handed.
Father Laufer's testimonies match those of George Tovaninara, a nephew of Torot.
Time lang kisim mo siya. Isa kisim de Selambanis, krama pinto pula pingalong. Sa kisim mo siya lang na injim mo. Después le digo siya kisim no pope, long ramale, all Japanese all padre all bin karabus.
Tovaninara and his elder brother John Tocoleto are nephews of Torot. Their mother, Teresa Yebarpilak, was the eldest sister of Torot. In August 1994, they called their wives and children, and together they made a pilgrim to Taugo, the camp where Peter Torot and his family lived during the war. Tocoleto was a young lad at the time and has not forgotten the layout of his childhood playground.
Time siapa na you had now good now long fight. Me play put down. Me come down now. Me come sit down long place and now me sit down long. Mall belong in yana. House belong in yana. Me stop. Tu pelarung belong in one play no. Ino put him back long na pelata sali. Gas slip long na.
Tocoleto led us to the dugout tunnel on the hillside used by Peter Torot. It was still intact. Inside one of the tunnels was a shelf dug out into the wall of the tunnel. As Tocoleto explained, Torot kept the Blessed Sacrament there. He also kept a lamp glowing beside it day and night. The tunnel, there were others for his brothers and relatives, were their shelter against air attacks. Torot kept his Holy Communion hidden inside his tunnel, especially when the Japanese tightened their grip on the freedom of the people, and particularly the activities of the church. As a catechist, Torot was alone at Rakunai. One of his most testing trials was when he single-handedly confronted the Japanese advance on the school and the mission station. Father Karl Laufer referred to this confrontation in his testimony.
Courageously, he met the incoming Japanese when guard and begged that the station be spared. But while he still spoke, a shot rent the air, and in the same moment, machine guns were directed on the evacuated station. The church, the house, and the school were damaged. It was to Torot's luck that in the confusion that followed, he slipped away. From this point on, he felt himself solely responsible for the parish at Rakunai.
This did not discourage him though. All evidences illustrate that if anything, he was all the more inspired to carry on the work of the church. He conducted many of his teachings in open-air settings at Taugo, his family camp. He also ventured to other camps where people lived to continue his work.
Kasi kismol sem askim nitok. Usati mikim God. No, unang wat mani mikim God eman plaza lo sem askim long. Lo yang pala limang. Emi skuli mi pala long. Ol mangi ansad lo sala auslo to time. Lo to finish. Na lo Friday all Friday sa lo sa mikim puti mi sala nem long ol lik mangi mabay. Ol kisim sampala school belong. Long lo to. O sem kasi kismo something na buktambu.
It was the beginning of 1945. and the beginning of the trial of Peter Torot.
Binari molcem Torot sabe wokim lo tulong olman nai blessing mol manol only like marti mol mana Mary nai wache mol liklik pikinin itu ol new pla pikinin na ol chapanel boklong lukimem na olimpin tambu mem pinis na manja ino.
Like Rufine Yamama, Rocco Sterupia could not remember the face of his uncle Peter Torot. He was 5 years old when Torot was killed. Tirupia's father was Torot's eldest brother. Every time Torot was summoned to the police, the matter was religion. The very first time was in Rabaul. Lieutenant General Hitose Imamura cautioned him to restrict church work, given the excuse that not only was it frustrating his forces from winning the war, but also causing him heavy casualties at the hands of the Allied air raids. The leading enemies of the Rakunai territory were two Japanese officers, Mashida and Gunto. To win local support, they encouraged polygamy, that is, to permit the men to take more than one wife. At the same time, they tried to recruit local girls to become prostitutes.
Yang pula Mary nambungi mol wantem blong bukumaus pamuk. Orang hari abtu masih kisi mol desa na tok. Plan pa mol Mary ya. Orang penausan panating na olman el siapa nak budi maus pamuk lain.
Tapi tapi lu kemem keni yo mari mol man kena Mary en oli koti mem ken long ol siapa. Na oli kare mem ngolok karambut ken.
According to the document, Torot was asked if he had officiated at the marriage and prayed with the people. To this, Torot answered, "Yes, I did what was my duty." After he was beaten, he was sentenced to 2 months' imprisonment. Sister Adriana was a young girl when Peter Torot called her to be a nurse to his wife Yepola, who was expecting their 3rd child. At that time, she was simply known as Luisa. Privately, Peter Torot put her in charge of his religious books with these specific instructions.
You look out long house me na all book. You look out long and no gutoli bangarapim Bible na book blong baptismo.
Kami stalong karambus mi bong ting nongat pelan di karambus itap ting 3 pala tasol 2 pala mana wantem Torot.
Arap Tobinabak was about 20 years of age when he was imprisoned. He had been accused of stealing tapioca. He is currently a pastor at the Rakunai United Church.
Mi saben go long garden long plan walk long garden. Na Peter Torot mi sta long house cook. All right, now time. Lik siki kisimem. All right. All kisimi mi noli puti mi long. That's all I walk polo Peter Torot long house cook. All right, Mr. walk long house cook staff. Go now. Enough now. Long time all Japan rendi now long. Ting long Torot. One pala day long afternoon, 2 pala siapa ni bin come up na. Long time Peter Torot lik siki kisimem pinis. Na mi pala ista 1 pala day, 2 pala siapa come up na. Salimi, siapa bos pala mi pala mi talks mi go kisim Peter Torot long. Api saya silip long enya.
It was late afternoon on that day. Tominabak returned with Torot, and together they waited in the cookhouse, situated somewhere down on the flat.
Ngalikam na wan pala siapan lukimi. Na kira bitop. Hey, you know go one time all man go and up. You know arim. Na mi talk no. Na mi talk all kita three pala ikam behind finish langin na lis kam stand up now long do. Ola tolirau sumi na wali talk you go and up. Mi kira mingo. Olman mi kira pika mau set olman sana pinit long do. Alright, I'll give him marasil na to torot. I'll talk mi mingo andap. Mi walk about mi tani mi olsem na mi kalap long leta mi look baking go long all.
Arap Tobinabek was the last prisoner to leave the camp and slowly walked up this hill, up to the top, but kept looking back because he wanted to see what would happen to Peter Torot.
I only pass him a yam belonging local, Katyan na news belonging, na li talking him you sleep. Right time he sleep. No chinda na emi sleep, broke him leg, or sem na put him on pelan belonging sem na sleep. Alright, I'll listen up. Na papa belum marasi na kisim ni side lombel belongin. Alright, tell me. I go trout. I'm already now passing mouse belongin. Alright, I'm now. He die now.
Peter Torot was injected with a lethal drug, after which he never regained consciousness. He passed away quietly late on a certain Friday afternoon in July 1945. News of his death was not broken until the next day, when the Wunayara police camp was awoken with whispers that Torot was dead.
Alright, I'll see upon now. Oliari all night belong all man, all listening out talk and pakatiket in the finish. No, only come outside now. Look, long Peter. Alright, all yasikim, hey, katiket in the long on him. Now me, he miss a finish, that's all me not like talk out or people like kill him or no got me talk, hey, me no can sabe.
The people at Taugo, Torot's farmstead, were the last to be told. The news sent shockwaves.
Ano ka daw, karay. Alino talk about, like karay. Ino 10 minutes na ka tayo kampula, pinis lang sila, pala niya. Dami pala bila si Mr. Huli tayo turo na isang na nakatok-tok blongol, unalakol ni sila manikam.
The son of a chief, Torot's fame and reputation grew and spread far and wide, not because he was the son of a chief, but rather because of his faith and gallantry to stand up for what he believed to be right.
E mama blami sa story ol sentok. Papa e van pela good pela mantru. E mi ken look him all visitors only ka long house in na pela pasi one plus something long on. I must give him something.
Only talking him, you know can make him law to long old man. Kristoy in number 10. Japan in good number 1. Torot in back him. Kristoy number 1. Japan in number 2.
A church inquiry which has to establish, in case of the confessor, that he lived a holy life. The church inquiry, in case of martyrs, has to establish with clear, full evidence that this man or this woman has been murdered, has been killed because of his faith. This is what has happened with Peter Torot.
The report he compiled remained a private document. All information about the martyrdom of Peter Torot are documented.
And the tribunal, between January and March of 1987, questioned 16 people, mainly people from Rakunai village, including members of Peter Torot's family, members of Rakunai village, 3 fellow catechists of Peter Torot, and in particular 3 fellow prisoners of Peter Torot. 3 people who were detained with Peter Torot in Wunayara prison by the Japanese, and among these 3 I have to mention one in particular, a certain Tobinabak.
The remains of Peter Torot will lie in a shrine at the Rakunai Memorial Church, and while he will be long remembered for his deeds and martyrdom, his killers The two Japanese officers, Meshida and Gunto, will remain secluded in the folds of the history books.
These two Japanese of the Japanese police were tried in Rabaul in 1946, between 1946 and 1948, were tried by an international tribunal. And we also know for historical sources that they were condemned to 15 years of prison. We also know from historical sources that at first, within the trial, they said that they didn't know nothing about Peter Torot, but then, pressure by the public prosecutor, they confessed that they killed Peter Torot, and this is what they said, because there was too much Cristo. There was too much Cristo.
Too much Cristo, 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 too much Cristo.
Peter Torot had to die because of too much Cristo. Two of the eyewitnesses, John Tokeleto and Simon Topalaula, came to Port Moresby in 1995 to witness his beatification, but soon after they rejoined Blessed Peter Torot in heaven.